early signing period keeping us hopping here at Mark Rogers TV. We bring in Kevin McGuffey of Last Word on College Football to get the latest on Kentucky's class with 20 signed today. So this early signing period has really taken the college football world for storm in regards to signing most of the players here in December instead of the usual February signing period. And I see it again here, Kevin, where most of the players, and this time 20 out of 21, when you're talking about just one more hard commit, have made their commitments final, signed on the dotted line, and there you go. We're all set with this Kentucky recruiting class. It's almost finished already.
Yeah, Mark, you're exactly right. Obviously this first year we've done this. I'm a big, at least for the first year, I'm a big proponent of this new early signing period because I think it helps schools, like Kentucky, because you've seen, time and time again, they'll have these guys that'll commit. You could use Jaron Williams as an example. He committed, decommitted, committed again, and ended up in Miami. But it's been, they get, the idea was to get these guys in, get them all signed today, and then you don't worry about, the Alabamas or the, Ohio States, even, somebody like that coming in and poaching, players that you're hoping to have on your squad. Now, Coach Stoops and his recruiting ace, Vince Marrow, said that they're still looking at maybe like 4 to 5 guys. They may try to sign, keeping 4 or 5 spots open to try to sign in February. Like I said, you mentioned one guy, Xavier Peters. He's a 4-star linebacker out of Ohio. He's the only one who did not commit today. That wasn't totally unexpected. As you said, he's still listed as a hard commit, and the coaching staff has no reason to think that he won't sign come February, but as we know, this is recruiting and anything can happen.
All right. Yes. Kentucky's class, number 28 in America right now, according to 247 Sports, and number 9 in the SEC. And again, this is typical. That's the plight of the likes of Kentucky, South Carolina, and so forth, Arkansas in the SEC, where you've got a top 28 recruiting class nationally, but still 9th out of 14 in the SEC. But that said, Mark Stoops doing an exceptional job on the recruiting front. So based on the 20 signed on the dotted line, Kevin, who stands out to you? Who are you getting excited about?
I think you have to start with Terry Wilson. He's quarterback from the junior college ranks. He's ranked, I think, as the top #1 dual threat quarterback in the JUCO ranks. He signed with Oregon originally, coming out of high school, was there 1 season, and then transferred, ended up at Garden City Community College in Kansas. Nebraska was after him pretty hot and heavy. Scott Frost, a new coach there, recruited Wilson to Oregon, originally out of high school. He's a guy, Stephen Johnson, the bowl game coming up is Stephen Johnson's last game. And, Wilson looks like, they have 4 guys still on scholarship, but, Wilson, I don't think signed with Kentucky to come and sit on the bench. You still have Drew Barker. You've got, Danny Clark, who was a former Ohio State commit, who you signed with Kentucky last year, and you also have Gunnar Hoke. But I mean, Wilson, touchdown Terry touchdown. It's they haven't decided yet on what he wants to call himself, but he's probably the top guy in this class, and it's definitely a position of need with Stephen Johnson graduating.
Maybe Terry should score 5 or 10 touchdowns before he makes that decision. Maybe actually show that he can do it at this level and then make that commitment to the nickname. That might be the order in which he might need to go. That's not what I'm expecting him to do, but that might be the way he would want to go.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, you want to get here first and show off what you can do, and score a few touchdowns, and then go from there. But yeah, like I said, no, he's definitely right there, the top of the list. And then the next couple of guys are linemen. Is Marquand McCall, who's offensive guard out of Michigan. He's actually Kentucky's highest rated commitment, and the interesting thing about him is that he can play, he's listed as an offensive lineman, but he can also play his defense on the defensive side. And the interesting thing was, you look at the signing day thing, the feature on him today, they actually listed him as a defensive lineman, which is, if you followed Kentucky at all the last couple of years, they really need some help, have needed help on the defensive line. And the coaches think he can come right in and possibly maybe even start as a freshman. And another guy is Darian Kennard, who's out of St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland. He there was some question as to whether or not he would sign today. He's originally from Knoxville and then moved to Cleveland a couple of years ago. And the new coaching staff in Tennessee were really trying to get in on him and trying to get him to flip. But he did sign this morning, and he's offensive tackle. I think he's 6'7", about 330, and he was selected to be in the U.S. Army All-American game that's coming up in January. That's on NBC. So he's the first player from Kentucky to be selected to that game since you had the trio of Landon Young and Drake Jackson and Cash Daniel 2 years ago.
So, Kevin, this is a narrative that Mark Stoops has established, and I'm going to point out two different things here. When we look at the best players in the Kentucky recruiting class, you mentioned McCall. He is the best player in the state of Michigan. I think they've got a coach up there who's generally done a pretty good job in recruiting, bringing in top 10 classes, but they take the best player in the state of Michigan away from Jim Harbaugh, Mark D'Antonio, etc. Darian Kennard, the second best player, according to the rankings in the class, out of St. Ignatius, and not just looking at the state being Ohio, but Ohio State fans will know that St. Ignatius has been long-standing one of the fine football programs in the country, and also a bevy of Ohio State football talent has come out of there, and he's the 17th ranked player at his position of offensive tackle. You see Stanley Garner, Florida recruit, DeAndre Square. So here's the fourth best player in the class. He's out of Michigan, and he's one of the top 10 players in the state of Michigan. Terry Wilson. Then we've got Brendan Bates. He's another Cincinnati kid, another Ohio kid, I should say. And so it goes on and on from there, where Mark Stoops making the inroads in Ohio. We've seen that over the last few years, and now into Michigan for two of the top 10 players.
Yeah, that's as you said, I think 7 of the 20 commits were from, I think 12 of the 20 commits were either from Florida or Ohio. Like Stoops, he's a Youngstown, Ohio native. Vince Marrow is an Ohio native. Steve Klinkscale, the defensive backs coach, I think he was the one who was big in Mark Hall's recruiting. And yeah, like I said, Michigan and both Michigan State were making pushes late on him, and he, like I said, he remained firm with his commitment to the Cats and signed today. And like I said, it's a huge, it's huge, because Michigan is not a place where Kentucky, to my knowledge, even recently, has ever really recruited. So, going in there, not only just going in there, but taking out the, arguably the best player in the state is a pretty big, accomplishment. And now the fact that he may, he's really serves a position of need, that he may end up playing defense, next year was, like I said, is just, they seem to improve, every year, with recruiting, and it's just, it's finally, it's starting to show from, what Kentucky recruiting was like when Stoops got here, 5 years ago. You're getting 1 star, an occasional 2, maybe a 3 if you get lucky. It just, the recruiting has just, has picked up, and I think it's starting to show. It's starting to show on the field as well. And like you said, Stanley Garner, one of the best players in Florida. He's a cornerback. The Cats are pretty well stocked at secondary, but then again, they were last in the SEC in pass defense this year for whatever reason. We talked back last summer about that highly vaunted, secondary, and it just did not pan out for whatever reason this year. Garner's a guy who could probably come in and push you guys, Beatty, Westry, those guys, from day one.
Yeah, so what stands out to me is the quality of the players coming out of specifically Ohio and also Michigan in the top 10 with the 2 players. And then also, obviously, the distribution of players north of the Mason-Dixon line versus the rest of the SEC is a stark contrast to what we see elsewhere. But Mark Stoops is making it happen, going that particular route, and he does it again here in 2017. Based on what the makeup of the roster is currently versus what you see with these what hopes to be 21 signees when the last one is signed, is there a good match in regards to maybe addressing a few needs on the current roster?
Like I said, I think they just kind of hit not really certain positions, just hit the offensive line. They have a lot of guys coming back this year, but they hit 2 or 3 guys on the offensive line who are going to be able to help going forward. Like I said, if Mark ends up in the defensive line, that's a position of need. They've got another guy that you don't really talk about too much, but they signed the number one, by some recruiting services, number one kicker in America, a kid named Chance Poore out of South Carolina. And they also have, because they lose Austin McGinnis, he's the school's all-time leading scorer and one of the best, the best kicker probably in Kentucky history. They lose him after this year. He's a kid as a freshman who's probably going to be expected to come in and right away from day one and be the kicker. And they also have a punter they got from Australia, a guy named Max Duffy. He's listed as like the best punter by there's not too many recruiting services that do kickers and punters. There's one, I think it's called ProKicker.com. I was looking at it yesterday, doing some research, and those, you don't talk about those skill positions, but those are positions of need that Kentucky's going to have next year, and they have two guys that they think they can come in and day one and fill, the kicker and the punter job.
We don't talk about them, Kevin, until we actually get on the field, and then there are certain points of the season in which people are wondering, why can't a team that plays in the SEC, that big of a program, find a guy that can kick it through the uprights?
That's right. Yeah, because right, because you go back to the South Carolina, Poore's from South Carolina. If you go back to the UK South Carolina game last year, their kicker missed like 3 or 4 field goals and even short ones, and everybody was like, oh no, now they're going to go after this kid because he's from South Carolina, and South Carolina had shown interest, but he stayed firm in his commitment. But yeah, you're right. I mean, point of fun, I was a kicker on my high school football team many years ago. So, but as you said, yeah,
soft spot.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for kickers. There is no doubt. So Kevin Butler, growing up, show my age a little bit, but Kevin Butler was my hero growing up. That's who I tried to emulate. Now, I was obviously anywhere close to that.
Kevin, do I get this right in remembering that Kevin Butler hit a 60-yard field goal?
I think so, yeah.
Against Clemson?
Yeah, that sounds right. I just remember going with my dad, we had season tickets to Kentucky games, and in the old Commonwealth Stadium, they had just the little bleachers in the end zone, and watching like Kevin Butler just take the ball and kick it out of the end zone on like every, not only out of the end zone, like out of the stadium, like on extra points and even short field goals. But anyway, I know we're kind of off the subject, but anyway, but like I said, those are two guys, Duffy and Poore, that are probably going to come in from day one. So
Kevin Butler went on to the NFL to kick for the Chicago Bears and win a Super Bowl in 1986 as well.
Yep.
All right, Kevin McGuffey joining us from Last Word on College Football to talk up the Cats with the early signing period upon us, and 20 of 21 that are expected to sign already on the dotted line for Kentucky football.